Well, if we think that Carrick managed the game at the Emirates quite well, I know that, James, you thought that Mikel Arteta did the exact opposite and managed it really, really poorly. From your seat in the press box, where did it all go wrong for Arsenal on Sunday?
Well, Oggy and I remember we talked about this just before Arsenal scored, actually, just about how quiet it was in the stadium and how just you could sense the nervousness. And I do think that this is a consequence, to some extent, of the work that Mikel Arteta's tried to do in bringing the fans closer to the team, and they've made a lot of strides in that area. They've tweaked little things with the matchday experience to try and generate this sort of atmosphere, this intimidating, hostile atmosphere. But a lot of the ways they've done it is sort of hype videos and talk the game up and get to the ground early and this is it here, this is now, this is not a drill, all this sort of stuff. And it's created this kind of urgency about every game that has tipped into almost a psychodrama for every home game now. And they are behaving as if it's April.
Yeah.
And when you whip up that level of emotion week after week after week, it becomes quite draining. And especially if you're then, producing performances that are predicated on fine margins. They're not rolling teams over 2-3, 4-0 and that kind of tension is released in the game. It's coming right at the end. And I've just been going back through their results, and I watch Arsenal as close as anyone, really. And I've seen a lot of reaction to this as being, it was a bit of a one-off against United. They've not played well consistently for quite a while. So since they were beaten at Aston Villa on the 6th of December, this is just Premier League. They beat Wolves at home 2-1. Own goal in the last minute.
Edgy game, yeah.
Edgy game. Then they went to Everton. They won 1-0 with a penalty. Weren't great, did the job, but again, another game of fine margins. They then beat Brighton 2-1 at home. They hung on at the end. Brighton scored second half. They were hey?
Own goal.
Oh, yeah, own goal, exactly. Then they played Villa. And now they were good against Villa in the second half. First half, they weren't. Second half, they blew them away, 4-1. Really good second half performance. But it was Villa's second game in London in, I think, 72 hours. So there was possibly a bit of fatigue in there. They then went to Bournemouth. They won 3-2, but they were hanging on at the end. Gabriel mistake. They went behind. Wasn't entirely convincing. And then they've had this run now of drawing 0-0 at home to Liverpool, drawing 0-0 away at Forest, and losing to United. So I think they've had this coming for a while. And when Arteta talks about the Forest game, for example, as he did post-match after the United game, you seem to want to bring that up. He said, people talk about Forest and we drew 0-0. They created nothing. It's not even Forest.
Yeah.
They're battling relegation. And the first point he goes to is, they didn't create anything and we had chances ourselves. And I think this speaks to the only thing that really could stop Arsenal winning the league, which is that if they continue to be this risk-averse, then they're going to play every single game with this tension and within these fine margins. And you don't win every game like that in this league because it's too competitive.
We were talking, I think it was 0-0 at the time, and I actually made a point saying Arsenal are so well drilled. It was really impressive to watch how well drilled they were in terms of whenever United broke, Declan Rice was there mopping up, and then whenever United were in the opposition half, Arsenal was so rigid with their banks of four and just defending. It was almost like an art form to watch it. Now it's clear that they must work on shape every day, which is quite boring if you're a player just walking through positional sense. And we just thought, it was quite robotic. So he's drilled his players to the point where can they think for themselves? Now, when Dorgu scored that second goal, we made a point, didn't we? Because all of a sudden they had this kind of impromptu gathering, the Arsenal players. Now, I think a little bit was because they weren't sure if it's a handball by Dorgu, but a lot of it was almost like they were all looking around at each other thinking, what do we do now? It wasn't a huddle, but it was definitely a sense of they were looking for somebody to say, right, come on guys, let's get ourselves out of this. Yeah. But nobody clearly had an idea what to do. And they started glancing over the touchline to Arteta as if to say, what now?
And what was next was a quadruple change.
Yeah, taking off your most creative player.
So I think it was 7 or 8 minutes after the goal. And we've tried to get our stats guys to find out exactly when it was. They weren't able, they don't have that data, but I can't think of a time he's done that before. And generally, it's pretty rare, isn't it, for a manager to make a quadruple change, especially in a game of that magnitude and quite so early on in the second half. It was before the hour mark. And I just thought it was the first time I think I can remember in a number of years looking at Arteta and thinking that that things are happening beyond his control. He's a control freak, and I mean that in a positive sense. What he's done, the structure and the discipline that he's instilled is remarkable. It's an incredible transformation. But that final little tweak is to just let this incredibly talented and vibrant squad go and play, and they're still a bit too risk averse. And at 0-0 and at 1-0, he's a picture of agitation. He's gesturing furiously. He's pointing to everyone where to go. He's geeing them all up. What was he doing when they were 2-1 down in the second half after he made that change?
Hands in his pockets.
Arms folded, watching. It was as if it's the first time I've seen him that passive in that kind of game situation.
Can I just ask you then about the change, that quadruple change? Because the narrative from the start of the season, I think from that Liverpool game, was that Arsenal have had the handbrake on, and Arteta has to kind of let them go. To me, watching that game yesterday, not just a quadruple change, the timing of it, and also Arteta being quite performative after the change when he sends his players on and he's doing all this, raising his arms to the crowd as if to say, I've done what you've asked, basically. To me, that looked like a really emotional decision. In his head, he's almost thought, all these fans are going to think that I haven't got the bravery to chuck on all these players and take the handbrake off, but I'm going to show them, here you go.
Yeah.
Now, I don't think that there's much sense in making emotional decisions like that in the middle of a game, because ultimately your players want to know that you're the guy in charge.
But it wasn't brave, was it? Because I know what you're saying, but
he's made it for the wrong reasons.
Yeah, and he's taken off a player like Odegaard who could create a chance. Odegaard has got his deficiencies, but he's a creative midfielder that could have opened up Man United's defence. Now, I was thinking this a couple of days ago before the game, how risk averse he is. I can't think of a manager that's won the Premier League as a risk averse manager. Now, obviously, people say Mourinho, but Mourinho was risk averse after Chelsea were 2-0 up.
Yeah,
you'd never get to a point where they try and control the game to the point, sneak a goal, and then defend. To win a league, you have to be ready to take a chance. And all the managers, I can't think of a single Premier League manager that's won the league by not taking chances. I don't think Arteta takes enough chances.
No, and it looked Saka was playing on the left at the end. I can't think of the last time he certainly started a game out there. It was a long time ago, and by throwing those four on as he did, but not really giving them. They sort of went for it, but they didn't really go for it. It was kind of yes, it's a big visual moment. You're changing four players, but they lost their patterns in build up, and you had someone like Eze, and the use of Eze is really interesting because I think a lot of Arsenal fans would like to see more of him, and I think he's starting to embody that issue that they have of, or do they want to actually sacrifice a bit of control to have someone who can go and do something in the final third, who might lose the ball and might have runners coming off the back of him, and they might be vulnerable on the transition. Okay, but you accept because of what he can do in the final third. And I've made this point on the pod before, but I think it stands, is that I think Arsenal is stuck between being the team they plan to be and the team they were last season. And that's when they made these changes, they brought in these players, Gyökeres we talked a lot about, they made these 7 signings, they spent 250 million quid, and all the chat was, we're going to be more direct, we're not going to play this horseshoe football so much, we're going to get it into Gyökeres earlier, we're going to open teams up quicker, we're going to be more dynamic. And they got to the top of the league when Gyökeres was injured. They had Mourinho up front, and they went back to what they were doing last season. And now they've got everybody available, or most of them available. I think they don't quite know which way to go with it.
Well, let's move on then to what it means for the title race. Because I was in Pep Guardiola's press conference on Friday after they were beaten by Bodo Glimt in Norway, and he looked quite rattled. He looked as if they obviously had a really poor result against United. They've had a worse result in Norway against Bodo, and he comes out with his demeanour changes when he starts to feel like things aren't going his way, and all of a sudden they've only had to beat Wolves at home 2-0 on Saturday, and it feels like the momentum has swung now back towards City. Is that the sense that you're getting as well?
Yeah, because I think Arteta was very honest after the United game, and he's one of those managers who quite often just paints a different picture of the game that we've all watched, and sort of relies on the fact that he obviously knows a lot more about football than all of us put together. But you sort of, you trust your eyes, and he's somebody who quite often will just say, well, actually, we dominated the game when sort of consensus is they didn't. He didn't do that. He sort of said, we were poor technically, we made mistakes. He acknowledged the nervousness in the stadium and didn't try to hide, away from that, which I thought was interesting. And as I've said, sort of listing those fixtures earlier, I felt this has been coming for a while. What they've absolutely just gotten to do now is just not panic. They're still 4 points clear. They're still the best squad in the league. And I said all the way along here, if they perform in an attacking sense and they can free themselves up to play with some expression, they will win the title because they are the best side with the deepest squad. But if they continue to allow the situation and the wider kind of chat around the 22-year wait for the title and whipping themselves up into a frenzy for every game, we can't possibly make a mistake, we can't possibly drop a point. If we do, City are going to hunt us down. They've got to get out of that mentality. Because, as you'd know, City haven't really been that consistent. They've not really been able to put them under that amount of pressure, and yet they still feel like this in January.
So, beating Wolves on Saturday was City's first Premier League win of the year. It felt like the season was kind of collapsing around them a little bit, and all of a sudden, they'll be waking up this morning feeling like they're right back in it. And the point I tried to make in the piece I wrote on Saturday, I think signing Semenyo and Mark Gahey in January, I can't remember a Premier League team being able to pull off two deals like that in January. Two peak age Premier League proven players who come in and bolster not only the squad but the first 11 of a title challenger midway through the season is absolutely massive. Semenyo scored 11 Premier League goals already this season. Gay's one of the best centre backs in England. I just think those two signings might play a massive part in what happens with the title race between now and the end of the season. And obviously Arsenal go to City, don't they? It's scheduled for April the 18th. I'm sure it'll get moved, but it's obviously back end of April. If City are within touching distance, the back end of April, I think that they'll think that this is theirs to win.
They haven't addressed their key problem, though, and that's the midfield. They've still got a situation midfield where Rodri's really struggling. Bernardo Silva's not what he was. Yeah. Reinders is, middle of the road player. They still got a midfield that can be overrun. And I think, in many ways, this is a really good title race because it's unpredictable, but it's probably the worst title race for, I can't remember, in terms of the quality of the teams at the top. So Arsenal, as strong as they are, they're not going to go down as one of the great champions if they win it because they lack a bit of fantasy. City, this is the worst Pep team since the first season he was at the club. Aston Villa, Villa are doing surprisingly well under Unai Emery, but just when they were going to knock on the door, they lost it on to Everton. So it's like, who's going to win this title? Now, you've got a smirk on your face.
I've got a smirk on my face because I know what you're going to say.
You think I'm going to top at Man United? No, listen. The Man United fans after the game at the weekend were chanting, we're going to win the league. Now, I assume they were joking. I hope they were joking because it does seem ridiculous. They were a club in crisis 3 weeks ago. But there is more than one precedent of a team 12 points behind in January winning the league. So 1996, 23 games gone. United were 12 points behind Newcastle and won the league by 4 points. Now, yes, they had a better team than they have now. 2 years later, 1998, Arsene Wenger's Arsenal were 12 points behind in February and won the title by a point. So, look, United have got nothing else on their agenda apart from Premier League games. There are frailties of the teams ahead of them. I don't think United have got a chance, but is it a 4-horse race? Is it a 3-horse race? Or is it a 3.5-horse race?
Oh, come on. Man United are not in the title race.
It's a 2-horse race.
A 2-horse race? Not counting Villa?
No, because of exactly the reason you just said. The minute that it looked like they could possibly push on. And also they've got Europa League, and I think the way that Emery's talking suggests that he is far more focused on winning the Europa League than he is.
But they're 4 points behind.
3 of their next 4 games are at home in the Premier League. They've got Brentford at home, Brighton at home.
They've got a very small squad, and John McGinn's injured for maybe 5 or 6 weeks. So I take your point, Rob. They have got issues that you think they can't do, but they're still there. And Arsenal and City are not pulling away. They're not showing the signs that they can win the league at a canter. So that's what I mean about being the worst title race for a long time. There's not a great team in the title
Emery's
race.
going to have a problem in the second half of the season about how he manages the Europa League and the Premier League, just like Amrim had last season and just like Postecoglou did, because he's going to be torn about what do you go and try and win a trophy which comes with Champions League football, or do you try and get Champions League football through the Premier League? And I think because the Europa League offers you both of those things, And Villa fans, a lot of Villa fans, this is anecdotal because it's just off what I've heard off on social media and on the radio and stuff. Villa fans will want to win a trophy. And I just wonder whether, when the going gets tough at the back end of the season, whether they're going to start resting players in the league.
But I'm just looking at the table now. I mean, they've got an 8-point buffer in third place. I mean, they've got a little bit of wiggle room there. I'm not suggesting they're going to sacrifice a chance to win the Premier League, but I mean, if Arsenal and City pull away, or one of those two teams pulls away from Villa, as we sort of expect they will do, then Villa do at least have that wiggle room to think, well, we're sort of safely ensconced in the top 4. And actually, we probably could rotate a little bit to prioritise the Europa League. It's not. I know you made the Spurs comparison there, but I mean they sort of wrote off their entire season and almost gave up on the Premier League. Villa can balance that a little bit more because of the buffer they've got already.
It's 10 years since Leicester won the league, and Leicester were much more unfanted than Villa. Villa have got some very good players. They've got a world class goalkeeper. They've got Morgan Rogers is one of the players of the season so far. Strong midfield, good defence. It's pretty much 1 to 11, isn't it? They haven't got a lot of depth, but Leicester won the league by pretty much using 13, 14 players in the running. So it's just because the City and Arsenal, for me, are just not showing signs of pulling away. Both those sides will lose more games.
And also, they've got the Champions League to contend with, because sitting here right now, I feel like Arsenal are going to go deeper in that competition than City are. And so it becomes how I've just talked about Villa and how they manage that. It becomes about how Arsenal manage it. And I know they've got a really deep squad, but they've got a run of games, just looking at the end of Feb and beginning of March. They've got Tottenham away, Chelsea at home, Brighton away, consecutively. And then obviously they've got that City game at the Etihad end of April. I just wonder whether it's all... And it goes back to the
last
same
game
question.
of the season, by the way, City Villa.
Yeah, I was just looking. Villa's last 2 fixtures are Liverpool at home and City away.
And it goes back to that same question.
What a way to win the title.
Yeah.
We've been asking and debating all season on this pod. Until Arsenal get over the line, there'll always be a question about the mentality, because that April game at the Etihad looks an awful lot like that one that we went to at the end of the season 2 years ago, when everyone expected Arsenal to give it a real go and they got absolutely thumped.
Yeah, and I tweeted something out about the Arsenal's record in the against the sort of traditional Big Six this season, which is that they've taken 9 points from seven games so far, 9 points from a possible 21. And in those matches, we've talked about, again, this idea that Liverpool at Anfield in August, there for the taking, lost a tight game 1-0. City at home a few weeks later, City were kind of all over the place, there for the taking. They scrambled a point in the last-minute equaliser. Chelsea, they played 11v10 for quite a long period of that game and didn't really go for it, drew the game. Liverpool at home, they drew 0-0 again. There was a chance to go and extend the lead at the top of the table, and then you got United, of course. And arguably, opening weekend, they were quite fortunate to beat United at Old Trafford. So there is a trend there, which should be a serious concern for Arsenal and Arteta, that they're just not quite. What they're not doing is allowing the squad, the best squad in the league, to show they're the best squad in the league. They're playing to avoid. I'm going to make it. This is a stupid comparison, but I'm going to make it anyway. Keir Starmer. Before the last election, everybody thought, and he's an Arsenal fan. So,
US listeners, he's the Prime Minister of the UK.
He is the Prime Minister of the UK. but he was worried that he wasn't going to be, and all he was trying to do was just not make any mistakes while the Tories blew up. And
Carry
that's
the Ming
kind
vase
of what
across the marble floor.
Exactly that quote I was getting to. And that's what Arteta's doing. He's carrying that trophy across the marble floor, hoping not to break it by not making any mistakes, rather than seizing the moment and grasping it. And it may work. They're top of the league. They're 4 points clear. They should not be panicking. We keep saying this. But you're leaving yourself vulnerable to the sort of vagaries of a very competitive league if you continue to play this conservatively.
Well, before then, we take a quick break. One word, who's going to win the league? I think it's going to be City. James?
I'm going to say City, because I haven't been able to say Arsenal for any of the time that Arteta's been manager.
I'm still sticking with Arsenal because I think City's midfield will see them lose more games than they want to. But just before we finish, finally, we all agree that Man United aren't going to win the league. But will they finish fourth? Will they beat Chelsea and Liverpool to fourth? Or do you think it's just been a bit of a flash in the pan start for Pankot Carrick?
I think they'll finish either fifth or sixth. I think they'll just miss out on the top four.
I think they'll be fifth. I think Liverpool will rally and get fourth.
Ooh, I don't know. I think they're going to finish third.
Didn't even give us that as an option.